Now it's our turn to, sorry for the words, but put our balls on the table.
Remember, kids, this is not how you play hockey. It's just ugly.
I like it.
Screw you guys. I'm going now.
You know what? I love ice cream too.
Go back to Canada, Guy Lafleur.
Game on!
Yeah, game on!
Hello, and welcome into another edition of the Hockey Show. I will be your host, your leader, your everything today here on the Hockey Show, Mile High Sports Radio. As you can see, I'm going co-hostless. That's right, I'm winging it. It's going to get crazy, but I'm going to be joined by a plethora of guests. I'm going to be joined by Taylor Baird, the Dallas correspondent for NHL.com. I'm going to be joined by John Forslund, a voice you've probably heard throughout your hockey viewing life on television. He's the play-by-play guy for the Seattle Kraken. I'm going to be joined by my friend Dennis Bernstein, who is with the fourth period out in L.A. This is the Hockey Show. We got quite a show for you, so we're going to preview just right now, right into it. I know we normally do matinee money. We're just going to go straight into previewing today's game. The Avalanche are in Dallas to take on the Dallas Stars, and with that, we're bringing in Taylor Baird, the NHL.com correspondent down in Dallas, to talk about today's game. Taylor, thanks for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing great. How's it going, guys?
It's good. It's very good. It's a little chilly down here. I wish it was warmer, but you know we can't always get what we want. Thanks for joining me. I'm sorry if you really got to the rink early. I did that myself last week, so I know what it's like.
Yeah, it's all good. At least I'm here.
Right. Now you know you won't be late. I just wanted to, talk all things Dallas with you before we get into kind of today's game. Obviously, busy week in the NHL leading up to trade deadline. Even deadline day was pretty busy, and the Stars made quite a few changes. So I just wanted to get your thoughts. Obviously, Dallas trades for Max Domi, Evgeny Dadonov, Scott Reedy, Dylan Wells. What are your thoughts on these new guys coming into this lineup?
I think that Dallas really needed a shakeup. From the start of the season, or from the start of the calendar year, their shooting percentage is amongst the worst, like 31st out of all teams, at like 4.5%. And they went through a stretch where their power play since January 1 was 5 for 53 chances, like 10%. God awful. And then, the month of February, they lost back-to-back to Columbus and Arizona. They needed something. They needed something to come in and give them a little bit of a different vibe. And I think they got that, which is really good. Dadonov, his acquisition, I think, kind of shores up a little bit of the depth. And Max Domi, I think, gives them the playmaker that they need to get, hopefully, a very stone-cold Mason Marchment going again.
Yeah, that's the one pickup for me. Domi obviously is the big highlight, I think, and he's one that I'm really curious to see how he fits. I think he, injects some energy into this lineup. Not that they necessarily needed it. Obviously, Dallas is leading the West with a plus 41 goal differential, so they have the ability to score, right? But they things have been up and down lately. They're 4-3-3 in their last 10, coming on a 2-game win streak, facing an Avalanche team that just doesn't know how to quit. How do the losses of guys like Gurianov and Anton Khudobin, change this lineup?
So Anton Khudobin had actually been in Texas with the AHL all season. I think he came back from hip surgery. He was sent down last season. He just wasn't in a space to compete on the NHL squad, which is kind of crazy to think about when you consider that back in 2020, he took the team on an incredible run in the bubble to the Stanley Cup final. So he kind of fell off the cliff pretty hard. So his departure, I think, is good just from a goalie depth perspective in that he was never really going to get that shot at making it back to the NHL here in Dallas. Denny Gurianov is a little bit of a different case. He had been given every opportunity to be a consistent contributor and get back to his offensive ways that he had a few seasons ago and has struggled to get back to since. He's a very smart intelligent person. He could break down the play for you and tell you exactly what he was doing wrong, but he could never seem to figure out how to execute changes. And so he lost the trust of Pete DeBoer and his staff fairly quickly, who came into the season with a pretty open mind about him. So in that case, I think that Gurianov's departure is a little bit more of addition by subtraction, so to speak. They get another guy who they know can come in and can contribute down the lineup, is familiar with DeBoer's system, and Gurianov gets a change of scenery that hopefully he needs to shake his game up.
When we were talking earlier on the Hockey Mountain High podcast, that's with Eric Dean of Mile High Sports, I've been filling in for my co-host, JJ Jerez, who is also on that. JJ's away from the team right now with parental duties. And we were kind of going through and seeing how the Avalanche match up against, the different teams in their division and in the Western Conference. And I'm curious now, I'm going to ask all of my guests this today, how you see Dallas matching up in the Central and in the West now that the trade deadline's over and it's really that last push into the postseason.
I like to think that Dallas stacks up well. I think they addressed some of their depth questions around the offense. They didn't really do much on the back end, but they've been a pretty defensively sound team this recent stretch, not really withstanding. And they have the one thing that I think any team needs to truly contend, which is a goaltender. Jake Ottinger is a man who, when he goes into games with high pressure on the road, going against the top teams in the league, he raises his game to a completely different level. And I think that intensity and that drive could have a profound impact on how far Dallas can go this season.
Yeah, I really like that. I like Ottinger. He's a bit of a wild card, right, when you try to see how other teams stack up against Dallas, because he has the ability to be a game breaker, to steal a game for the Stars. I'm less certain about Wedgwood, and I'm curious your thoughts on just what he presents as a backup. Obviously, the goal is to get Ottinger as many starts as possible, and even in Colorado, we have seen Wedgwood be Wedgwood and steal those games, but just your thoughts on that tandem.
So it's actually kind of interesting because Wedgwood is currently out of the lineup with a lower body injury. He's been contending with that for about the past week or so and has missed a few games. Dallas actually recalled Matt Murray, the other Matt Murray, as they've had to explain, and he got his first NHL start against Chicago in the second half of a back-to-back on a team that had literally just lost 2 straight games to the worst teams in the league and pulled off a really solid win against Chicago just 2 nights ago. So I think that there's maybe some hope that if Wedgwood is, for whatever reason, unable to get over this injury and has to be shut down, there's depth behind Ottinger that will allow him to get those spells in that rest that he needs and keep him fresh down the stretch.
I'm glad you clarified it was the other Matt Murray. I had a lot of confusion going on in my brain in the last week where I was like, I didn't realize Dallas had Matt Murray, and then Toronto was talking about activating Matt Murray, and then I was very, very confused as to what was going on in the league for at least 7 days.
Yeah, I think I saw Evolving Hockey actually labeled him as Matt Murray too, because they've never had a player at the same position with the same name before.
Yeah, it's smart. It's brilliant. Other contributing factors, I think, for Dallas's success, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got 54 points out of Jamie Benn this year, 25 goals. You've got 40 points out of Tyler Seguin, 17 goals this year. I feel like, these guys seem kind of rejuvenated, whereas last year maybe they weren't performing the way they were. We know Tyler Seguin is coming off of some surgeries that really slowed him down a bit last season, but it seems like these guys have a lot of, energy, back into their game with the way this team's playing, the way that Jason Robertson's really taken the lead across the board.
For sure. Actually, in Dallas, they've started to refer to Jamie's season this year as the Renaissance. And he's been playing so well. He's found some great chemistry with 19-year-old Wyatt Johnston, and those two combined have just been able to click, even though the third spot in their line has kind of been a little bit of a rotation. And Jamie Benn's been clicking on the power play, and I think there's something to be said about playing a fun brand of hockey. This is not the Rick Bowness era, the Ken Hitchcock era of the Dallas Stars. They are asked to be aggressive. They are system-wise asked to be more aggressive, whether that's on the penalty kill. I mean, they've already matched or succeeded, I think, the number of shorthanded goals that they scored all of last season, and there's still a whole quarter of the year to go. So I think he's been finding a lot more fun in playing the game again. And I think that fun and the success that the team had to start the year has kind of bled into the entire lineup.
We've seen that here in Colorado as well, the impact that, kind of taking the pressure off can do for top-line talent. When talking about deficiencies and strengths of these two teams that are playing today, kind of changing gears, Pete DeBoer is a coach that knows how to beat the Avalanche. We've seen him do it in the postseason. Obviously, it's not the postseason now, but, this is a bit of a Central Division showdown, a taste of things to come. So what are you looking at in this game? What does Dallas need to do to be successful here?
I think the first thing is to get off to a better start. They've surrendered the first goal in something like 9 out of their last 11 games or something of that nature. So they've been putting themselves into holes early and struggling to find their way out. The last 2 games they've done better-ish at that. So you want to see them come out. It'll also be a big emotional day. Jamie Benn is celebrating his 1,000th NHL game today with a ceremony pre-puck drop. So you've got to imagine that the team is pretty fired up. And then when you see that, your GM goes out and has made some additions and given you some weapons, I think there's a vote of confidence that they truly believe that this team could go all the way. So you've got to go out now. You've got to prove it. And I think what I'll be looking for from Dallas's side is, do they consider themselves in the same level as Colorado? Can they bring that intensity from the start to finish in the entire game and prove to themselves and prove to the rest of the league that they were not just some hot shooting percentage spike at the start of the season?
And we've seen from the Avalanche yesterday, Josh Manson is out with the same lower body injury he has dealt with earlier in the season. Cale Makar is finally out of concussion protocol and returning to the lineup. And Val Nichushkin is a question mark here. We don't know if he's going to play or not due to illness. Obviously, no morning skate this morning, so you don't really get a glimpse of that. But that's what we're looking at. Avs at the Dallas Stars today. Taylor, any last thoughts on the game or anything you wanna discuss here before I let you go and get back to it?
No, I think it's going to be a really fun one. I think if the Dallas-Vegas matchup last Saturday was any indication, the team has what it takes to go up against the best in the West, and I hope that we have a really good game today.
So do I. We saw Derek Brassard. He played in his 1,000th game for Ottawa recently. He had 2 goals. I believe no player in the NHL has scored more than 2 goals in their 1,000th game. So I'm interested to see if Jamie Benn can maybe pull off the Hattie and make some history there. But only time will tell. Thank you, Taylor, for joining us. That was Taylor Baird, Dallas correspondent for NHL.com, managing editor of Defending Big D. This is the Hockey Show on Mile High Sports Radio. Coming up next, we'll be joined by John Forslund, the play-by-play man for the Seattle Kraken. This is the Hockey Show on Mile High Sports Radio.
Right now, it's 16 minutes past the big hour. Is that not right, Mr. Scream? Great, good stuff. I think people are getting really cranked.
We're back. The Hockey Show here on Mile High Sports Radio. I'm your solo host, Ryan Bolding. I got Danny Bailey keeping me going behind the glass. The man is busy. We're going to the phones all day. Now, next up, we're joined by the legendary NHL broadcaster, John Forslund. You probably know him from ESPN versus NHL on NBC, NHL on TNT. He's also the play-by-play man on Root Sports for the Seattle Kraken. John, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great, Ryan. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing very well. I was hoping that you guys would be in town. I wasn't going to catch you on a flight or anything. Did you guys come in last night?
Yeah, we flew out right after the game in Columbus and got here in the wee hours and can watch the Avalanche this afternoon and get ready for tomorrow night.
Yeah, big game watching. Lots of games on today, but a big game to watch for the Kraken. See how the Avalanche fare. This would be the fourth back-to-back for the Avalanche, John. I don't know if you knew this, where they're playing a rested team in the second game and traveling for the second game. So an interesting one for the Avalanche for sure.
Well, it is, considering how they've had to juggle their goaltending, right? So, when you have injuries, when you have new goalies and you're trying to get them in the mix, you've got your number one in Georgiev, who's been asked to play on back-to-back nights. That's unusual, especially in the West, because there's more geographic area to cover. So they've done a nice job with it. It evens out. It's a situation. The Kraken have had it both ways. Seattle has, especially early in the season, was able to get a lot of teams who had played in Vancouver the night before and then jumped down to play at Climate Pledge Arena. So, but as you go through a matrix of a schedule, you'll see where, you'll get a situation where it's kind of unfair too. But they battled through it. The players do a remarkable job. And at this time of the year, I think now that the trading deadline has come and gone, adrenaline kicks in. And for teams that are in and around the playoff spot and can smell it, and for the team that plays here that's got a championship pedigree, they know what it's all about.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about the trade deadline. Seattle, relatively quiet. It seems like, the team was pretty happy with the moves that they made in the offseason and the way that this roster is stacked up. How do you feel about that kind of, standing pat at the deadline, knowing where all of these players, just a lot of moves prior to the deadline and on the deadline?
Well, I think you have to really take into account, each specific situation around the league, right? And so you have teams that are in a winning cycle. You have certain teams who are in a cup cycle where if you don't win the cup, it's a failure. That's a nice group to be in, but that's a tough one because only one team can win. And then you have teams who are looking at whether or not they're legit, like Detroit. Detroit had to make some decisions based on, 3, 4, 5 points off the line. If they do get in, how realistic is it that they'd even win a round? And so Steve Yzerman made some moves and acted on some expiring contracts. For the Kraken, it's year number 2, right? So it's year number 2 of a franchise. And I think what Ron Francis is keeping in mind here is the fact that it's just that. He not only has to foster the growth of the NHL team, the AHL team, and whatever prospects they have through 2 drafts. So they're only hitting their 3rd draft. And I think if you start moving pieces and moving prospects and draft choices to get a player or 2, is that player exactly what you need? Is that player any better than what's already with the Kraken? And I think that's how he looked at it. And so this team has been remarkable from the very beginning of the season. They're a tight team. They're a wonderful locker room. And I think more or less he's saying, you know what, guys, there isn't much that's really going to help the team, so it's on you. Great job. And I think last night, they usually right after the trading deadline, you'll see teams that are trying to find chemistry. You'll see teams who are demoralized. And you'll see teams who say, okay, let's go. And I saw a Kraken team last night in Columbus, Ryan, that said that. Okay, let's go. Let's win a game we're supposed to. Let's get it done. Let's pick up 3 wins of a 4-game road trip and get on to Denver and see what happens. So I really think that's where it was. Maybe weeks ago in January when the team went 7-0 on a road trip, I think he was probably thinking, if you could add a top-line player, a top 4 defenseman, and sacrifice a lot of future, if he felt the team could really make a strong run in the West, okay, maybe he does that. But things changed a little bit. The Kraken came down to earth. He was able to look at it, have patience, and basically say, you know what, we're going to be good whether they get in with this group or not, and I don't need to upset what's going to happen in the next season and beyond. So I think that's how he looked at it. I think it's the right way to go, and just roll with it. The West is wide open. I really believe that Colorado is still the team to beat once they get their pieces back in place. They're already starting to find the groove. I have everybody a notch below them, but if they falter, or someone finds the right chemistry at the right time in the playoffs, anything's possible. The East, not so much. I think in the East you can see who the elite teams are.
Yeah, for sure. Boston seems like the biggest threat out in the East. And then I mentioned this in the previous segment, Mile High Sports Zone, Arif Dean on his podcast, Hockey Mountain High. We were kind of going through team by team and talking about, where teams had deficiencies, where they had strengths, and kind of how they matched up. And I'm curious, John, to get your thoughts on what this team has an abundance of, maybe what they're missing, and how they're going to match up, particularly in the Pacific.
Well, the Kraken from top to bottom have a lot of the same. They're a balanced team. The makeup of the team are a lot of guys who played in second, third line situations with the previous teams. That's the forward group. The defense, by and large, the same way. But I thought initially they had a better roster for the first season than it showed. I think there were a lot of factors that went into it. I think the COVID situation was tough on them bonding as a group with all those protocols in place. You had 23 different stories coming into one place, brand new, and they had a hard time with it. And as the season went along, they had challenges and came off the rails, and it didn't really go anywhere close to what they expected. They expected to be competitive, and they weren't. And they expected Philip Grubauer to be better than he was in the first season. In the second season, the players that remained after year number one came back to a situation they were familiar with, immediately started to bond and enjoy themselves, which I don't think they did in the first year. Ron Francis made a lot of moves to kind of bolster the offense. Andre Burakovsky, Oliver Bjorkstrand, Justin Schultz on defense. They're pieces. They're mid-range pieces. They're not big names in terms of the Goodrows and the Kadris and the players that were available in the last off season. But you know what? They find their slots, and within this lineup, you've got the most balanced scoring and a high-scoring team you're going to find. They're among the league leaders in 5-on-5 scoring. They're defense scorers. At times during the season, they've outscored their problems. What I mean there is they've had some defensive issues. They've had some goaltending issues. They've survived that. And now the goaltending is getting better, especially Grubauer. Grubauer seems to be dialing himself back in at the right time. And that's what you have. So they don't rely on a line or six forwards or a Norris Trophy defenseman to kind of get them to where they need to go, or a Vezina goalie. They rely on teamwork, and they're fast. They play fast. They're very good in the middle of the ice. When they're on their games, they control the center zone. They control it offensively and defensively. So they've been able to beat Boston. They almost beat Boston for a second time this year, a couple of weeks ago at home, where they had a lead, a one-goal lead with 4 minutes left, and the Bruins came all the way back and won the game. But they shut out the Bruins in Boston this year 3-0. Nobody's done that. So, they're capable of playing with elite teams. They're also capable of being inconsistent. And that's their mission now in the weeks that remain, is to find the same game over and over again. Because this is one team that has played to an identity, and I think Dave Axtell, their coach, deserves a lot of credit. He took some heat in the first year, and he's done a really good job kind of building these guys back to this place, and we'll see where it goes.
I have so many things I want to touch on from there, but I'm glad you ended with Dave Haxtell. I think I was one of the people who was questioning last year whether, he had the ability to get this team to gel together and to have success. And so I have to say I'm very impressed with what he has managed to accomplish this year, and maybe that, any criticism was a little too premature to give to him on obviously a first-year team. But this is a team that's swept 5 teams in the East: Columbus, Buffalo, Philly, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. This is the team that's got Jared McCann is the first 30-goal scorer in franchise history. But not only that, there's 12 players on the roster with double-digit goals, and you've got, 10 players on the roster with 30 or more points. I mean, the Avalanche only have 8 players over in double-digit goals right now. It's a very top-heavy scoring team, and so when you look at the lineup, like you said, it's a lot of consistency in scoring up and down the lineup. That depth really helps. And then I'm curious your thoughts on just how Martin Jones kind of elevating his play has helped Philip Grubauer kind of regain his groove here lately.
Well, that's well put. That's exactly what happened. Like they went out and got Martin Jones because Chris Drieger injured his knee, severe knee injury in the World Championships. So he's just coming back in the American Hockey League this week. So he's been on rehab all season. So they knew they had to get an insurance policy. They took a flyer on Martin Jones on a 1-year deal. And at the right time, he was unbeatable. And he was finding ways to win. He was sensational at times. And like I said before, he'd play in those 8-5 wins that they had. They scored 8 goals in the game 4 times. And, you know, it reminded me of what we saw in the 80s. So, but he was making, like Grant Fuhr did for those great Edmonton Oilers teams, he'd make the big saves to win the game 7-5. That's all that matters, right? So Martin Jones has played 41 games. He has 24 wins. He's been a great story. And at the time that he was playing that way, Philip Grubauer was getting backup starts. It wasn't always fair for him. And the other thing that was going on was that they were scoring more goals when Jones played than for Grubauer. So more run support for Jones. And it was astonishing, the disparity in that statistic. You know, when Jones was in and when Grubauer was in, Gruby was asked to win a 2-1 game. And he wouldn't be there. And because of that, you know, you would look at it and say there's another loss for Grubauer, but you had to look inside the numbers to understand what's happening. Grubauer has reestablished himself. He has played brilliantly in losses for me. He's played brilliantly in wins. And I believe, you know, for this team to be real, if they do make the playoffs, it's on the shoulders of Philip Grubauer to help them get to where they need to go. Because, you know, he if you know anything about him, he's a really great guy that cares and puts a lot of pressure on himself. And I think in the first season, he's trying to live up to this big contract they gave him after he was a finalist for the Vezina Trophy in Denver, right? So, to a fault, he was putting a lot of pressure on himself. And now I think he did a little bit of that this season, but it seems like it's going away. It seems like he's been doing a great job. They have a new goalie coach, Steve Briere, who was in Toronto for a number of years. And he's come in here, and I think he's done some really good things for Philip mentally. And we'll see. I'm looking forward to see him play tomorrow night. I'm expecting him to play against the Avalanche and see where it goes. Because, again, he's taking steps here towards becoming the true number one at the right time of the season.
And it's always good to see a guy play against his old team and potentially have success against them. I was very impressed with the first time the Kraken came through this season. The game that they managed to play really kicked off, I think, you know, the early start of that win streak that you were talking about. The Avalanche, on the other hand, Alexander Georgiev, he's got about 4 days of rest after he didn't play in the high-scoring game against the New Jersey Devils, and he's expected to start today in Dallas. We may get to see Keith Kincaid for the first time in an Avalanche sweater.
Yeah.
He's been recalled prior to the NHL trade deadline, so he's no longer eligible, I believe, unless he was on paper with the Colorado Eagles to play at the AHL. So that'll be an interesting thing. And we've seen with the Avalanche, with Grubauer, with Darcy Kemper, now with Georgiev, the ability for this unit and the defense in particular to really build a goalie up and help them produce strong numbers. I know you said the defense has been good, if not inconsistent at times for Seattle. But one guy I wanted to talk about is Vince Dunn and just the season that he's been having.
Who's that? I'm sorry?
Vince Dunn.
Oh, Vince Dunn has been remarkable. The thing about him is in the first season, they brought him in to do what he's doing now. But it was in, you know, stops and starts for him in the first season. And by and large, a lot of that had to do with the fact that Mark Giordano was on the roster. He was the captain. He was playing a lot of the high minutes, power play, penalty killing, even strength. Dunn wasn't getting in a groove. He was on a second power play that might have played 30 seconds. He wasn't getting touches to feel like he could get to his game. When the trading deadline passed last season and Giordano was dealt to Toronto, Vince Dunn went into his role and had a great push in the final month. It opened up the coach's eyes to give him a little more trust when he came back for his second season. He committed himself to a real strong off-season program with Gary Roberts in Toronto, came back in tremendous shape, has played every single minute virtually of the season alongside Adam Larson. Those two guys, you have to really follow the Kraken and watch hockey closely to understand how good they've been. When I tell people how good they've been as a tandem, they believe me a little bit. They give me some respect, right, Ryan? But They raise their eyebrows. They're like, really? You know, you're talking about some of the better defensemen in the league. Now, I'm talking about the two of them as a duo. But you look at all their metrics, you look at all their analytics, and it's all right there in front of your face. But Larson's ability to eat minutes, play a snarly game, move the puck, skate better than most people realize, and then Dunn being able to carry the puck, be a one-man breakout if he has to be effective on the power play, make a first pass. He made a pass through the middle of the ice last night to Schwartz. Jaden went in on a breakaway, got foiled, but it was a tremendous play. Making north passes is a key in today's National Hockey League. You've got some of the best that you get to see every game here with the Avalanche in terms of playing that way and getting the puck up to talented forwards and letting them do their thing. It's a key in terms of the way Colorado plays. Dunn's that type of player. So it's a contract season for him, RFA. They'll get into a situation where they're going to want to extend him. They might have to go to arbitration to get it done. Who knows? But he's in the right spot. And I think he's going to have a great future with the Kraken. And the other thing about Vince is he plays with an edge. You know, he's not afraid to mix it up. He's not afraid to get under the opponent's skin. The Kraken, to be fair, don't have a lot of that. So that pushback factor with discipline is what the playoffs are all about. So it'll be interesting to see. The other thing, too, it's about him and others on this team. You look at the Kraken roster, if they do make the playoffs, and they're in a great spot to do it, a lot of people won't give them a chance, which is fine. That's good for the team that's looked at that way because there's not a lot of pressure. But look at the roster and how many players have deep playoff experience and have won Stanley Cups. For an expansion team, they have a lot of that. Vince was a big part of what St. Louis did in 2019, along with Schwartz. Larson has played in the finals. Schultz has won 2 cups. You go up and down the list here, you've got some cup experience. You've got cup experience in goal. So that could bode well for them in the second season if they make it.
We talked a lot about, in Colorado, signing players who have experience is one thing, but signing players who have experience and contribute is another. And I think, to your point, we're seeing quite a bit of that for the Kraken this year, and I love to see it. I love to see this franchise having success now. We're almost done with you, John. I'll let you get out of here, but first, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about your appearance on the brand new podcast for the Seattle Kraken, Signals from the Deep, hosted by Nick Olczyk. You and Eddie O were on there, and my buddy Grant Beery was the producer. So I got to ask you, how was Grant's production ability? How did he do, setting everything up, keeping everything going for you on Signals from the Deep?
Oh, he's a secret weapon, that guy. He just sits in the corner and doesn't say a lot, but he is the key to that podcast. He's done a great job with the Kraken. I'm very happy at this stage of my career, and I can speak for Eddie. Two of us have been around a long time. Eddie is a remarkable player, which is just dovetailed into this amazing broadcasting career. I've been broadcasting. I kid around since the War of 1812. So there's a lot of things here that for us we feel a ton of energy being part of an organization that is progressive. The Kraken have taken on so many initiatives away from the game that are important in today's world, and they want to be leaders. And it's important in Seattle to be that way. And Grant and his role is very good. So. It was well done. It was a maiden voyage for that podcast, and there'll be many more to come. But he's part of a great team, Grant is, and a good man.
He's going to hate me for saying this, but next time you see him, you're going to have to ask him for photos of his Avalanche face paint because he likes to do it up for hockey games. He's a big hockey fan, so he might be mad at me for saying that.
I know he is, and because we're an expansion team, we have a lot of people, in the front office that have had previous allegiances, and we've got to exercise those, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And but listen, I know from being in North Carolina for almost 25 years, now when you get and Denver's that way too, because Denver has changed so much since the Avalanche came here from Quebec as a city, right? And it just continues to grow. And when that happens, you bring in fans from other places and other generations. And I grew up a Ranger fan, and then I always say, listen, there's room for 2 jerseys. There's room for 2 sweaters. You can be a Ranger fan because that's where it was, or a Bruin fan, Pittsburgh, whatever it is, and then you can take on the home team. And I think our markets are similar that way, certainly with an expansion team. But we're growing a tremendous fan base. I'm sure you've seen the building, and it is a remarkable place. Climate Pledge Arena is probably one of the best, if not the best facility in North America right now.
I haven't been yet. I got to get out there. Thank you for joining me, John. It was a pleasure. I'll see you at the rink tomorrow. I'll stop by and say hi. I'll be there for the Kraken skate. I appreciate you taking the time to come on today, and we will see you tomorrow.
Always a pleasure, Ryan. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to seeing you. Take care.
Thank you. That was John Forslund, play-by-play man for the Seattle Kraken on Root Sports. Thanks to him for coming on. We're going to hit a break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to chat LA Kings and the NHL at large with Dennis Bernstein of the Fourth Period. This is the Hockey Show on Mile High Sports Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Bolding. Danny Bailey behind the glass. We're constantly running up that hill.
Let's go, Colorado!
We are back. The Hockey Show here on Mile High Sports Radio. Going down the stretch just like it is time to do in the NHL. Joining us now, my old friend Dennis Bernstein of the Fourth Period. Dennis, how are you today?
RB, great here in LA. Hope likewise in Denver.
It is all right. It is all right. Thank you for joining me for morning skate. If you end up having to go in the locker room or whatever, let me know, and I'll just have to sit here and talk music with Danny until time runs out. But I appreciate you joining me.
No, I actually hooked it all the way back to my home in Encino, so I'm home. So we're free and clear to talk hockey with you.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I'm kind of going around the horn today. We talked Dallas Stars earlier. We just talked Seattle Kraken with John Forslund. No offense to San Jose, but I'm skipping them on Tuesday. They're a bit of a seller this year, and I'm jumping right to the Kings. The Kings, I think, for me, are one of my bigger surprises of this season in the Western Conference, along with Seattle. But I'm just curious, your thoughts, Dennis. You're embedded in there. Should we have seen this coming from LA? I know they didn't fall all the way down, but I think this kind of resurgence here from them, being second in the Pacific, 2 points behind Vegas, is very impressive in my eyes. Uh-oh. Dennis, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
There you go. We lost you.
Okay. I was going to say, last year they were a 99-point team. Lost in 7 to Edmonton in the first round. They are, so I thought they would be a 100-point team. Now, here's the thing, Ron. To get to where they are at this point, and I think they're on track for 101 points, it's a very different team. If Avs fans have known the Kings over the last 10 years, they won on defense and goaltending.
Right.
That's what they traded for at this deadline. They are the opposite. They are an entertaining team. They score a lot of goals. Their power play, I think, is top 5 in the league. So it's a very different team that's basically last season. So I wasn't surprised. People, if they find a way to win the division, right? I do think that people will be surprised, but I won't because I picked them a couple of months ago. I think Gavrikov and Korpisalo was a big move for them as well.
Yeah, I was going to talk pretty active on the trade deadline. They pick up Nate Schnarr, Zach McEwen. They get the rights to goalie Eric, I'm guessing Portillo. I'm going with the Chicago pronunciation of that. Gavrikov, like you said, Korpisalo, and, I mean, some big additions, particularly in Korpisalo. This is a guy I was keeping an eye on. He's coming back together for Columbus, entering the trade deadline, gets held out of game, gets traded, and now you've got this tandem of Copley and Korpisalo in net. I'm curious just what your thoughts are on what kind of damage those two can do together.
Well, it's one thing is you forget the subtraction. Jonathan Quick leaving Los Angeles, which was earth-shattering for a lot of fans here. But when you look at John's numbers this year, he kind of played his way out of Los Angeles. And the reality of it was He asked for a 2-year extension over the summer, and the Kings said, let's wait. And then so while John said he was surprised with the trade, and I think a lot of people were, he should have got an inkling coming into the season that maybe this was his last, and in fact it was his last. So can he do damage? Look, Korpisalo was what, 913 save percentage guy in Columbus with a bad team. Now his goals against don't look great, but the league average is 905. So they are better today than they were on Tuesday, swapping out Korpisalo for Quick. Not to disrespect what John's done here, but this season it was not a good season for him. So Korpisalo's ready. He's healthy, and he should make them better at net going forward.
Yeah, talking about Quick, it seemed like the conversations I had with media members out here, they were surprised not only that it happened, that he had to fly back with the team on the plane back from Winnipeg, I believe, and they seemed like everybody seems to think like it was this great disrespect after everything he's done for that organization. And while I don't necessarily disagree to a level, it's part of the business, right? Almost anybody is fair market, free trade available at some point in their career. And with the season he's having, like you mentioned, it's not surprising. But I am curious now your thoughts on the sort of Jonathan Quick revenge tour, right? Because LA trades him to Columbus thinking they moved him all the way to the East, and Columbus flips him right back in division to the Vegas Golden Knights.
It's happened before with Martin Jones, where they traded him in the Milan Lucic trade to Boston, and Boston flipped him back to San Jose. Here's the thing, Ryan. If he's going to be a 350 goals against, 876 goaltender, the Kings aren't going to worry about him. But if he now has a new fire in his belly and a lot of motivation, and I believe there's a game on April 6th in Vegas where I assume if he's healthy and playing decently well, he will start against his own teammates, and then maybe they face him in the playoffs. So John's got to raise his game. And the challenge with Jonathan Quick, and look, he's an all-timer. He's one of the Mount Rushmore guys here in Los Angeles. But he's never adapted his game to change. Like, his style has not changed over 16 years. And I talked to other guys like Mike McKenna, some other goaltender guys, and he never changed, and he never adapted his game to face the great offensive skill of what's in this game today. So I think that's the challenge. Can he change? And I doubt he's even going to change it when he gets to Vegas. Vegas is a really good team. He's going to be super motivated. But, Ryan, he's got to stop the puck better for him to be an impact player. And when you watch Aiden Hill last night put up the insane performance in overtime and in the shootout against the Devils, I'm not sure how much John's going to play down the stretch. He is healthy, but his performance has to be way better than what he gave Los Angeles this season.
Yeah, and it's interesting for Vegas. They just cannot keep goalies healthy there. So he comes in, I see him as the number 3, 2-3, depending on how he does, right? And they're waiting for LB to come back off of his injury. Aiden Hill just came off of an injury. It's an interesting situation there. For LA, I've been talking to everybody today about how their team stacks up against their division in the Western Conference, and I'm curious how you think LA stacks up. Goaltending was a question mark for me. It's not as much of a question mark anymore. I think offense is one of their real strengths. Defensively, is that possibly a deficiency you see for this team?
Well, Gavrikoff's going to make a big difference. He's going to play on the second pair tonight. He's going to play with Matt Roy. A big guy gives them some size on the blue line, block shots. A really, really good move. Here's the thing, Ryan. The only team that I clear-cut could beat the Kings in the playoffs without question is a very healthy Colorado Avalanche team. All the other 6 teams that will be in the tournament with them, Vegas, and Edmonton, they all have flaws. And that's why I think Rob Blake chose to make a trade a first-round draft choice and took a big swing here because there is a path to getting out of the conference and getting to a cup final. So I think they're as good as any. I think it wouldn't shock me if they won the division, and they have a lot of home games. They have 19 left. They have, I think, 13 at home, a lot against non. They're the fifth. They have the 5th easiest schedule, so they can go deep. Could this team face the Avalanche in a conference final? They very well could be. But they got to play the games. We'll see what effect Korpisalo has and what Gavrikov has. But again, I think on paper they are a stronger team. They're already a 100-point team. So I would not be shocked if we're sitting here you and I talking about an Avs Kings conference final, in May sometime.
I would love to see that. And I think that the Pacific, 3 teams were really sellers: the Canucks, the Ducks to a degree, and the Sharks to a degree. I think that obviously helps LA down the stretch, but it's those games against the other teams, the games against the Buyers, the Knights, the Oilers to a degree, the games against the Avalanche, the Stars, the Jets that really determine how this team can compete. And so it's going to be real interesting to watch them down the stretch, I think.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be really compelling because, again, they go 3 deep on their offensive lines now, and that never happened. When they won championships, they had, Brown, Kopitar, whatever, but you have Kevin Fiala, who's made a huge difference, RB, in this team. Like, he's galvanized this offense. The reason they're way better is because he brought creativity, he brought skill. You see a guy like Gabe Velarde, who's on the third line, he's got 20 goals, right? So there's a lot of depth. And, of course, Adrian Kempe has emerged to be that dangerous. He repeated the trick. And some people say, well, he had a bunch of empty net goals last year, but 35 he could get the foot. He is a dangerous team. They have dangerous scores on all 3 lines. I'm not even talking about a kid like Arthur Kaliev, who has, 10 or 11 goals on the 4th line. So, again, their offense will carry them this season. It's a question, like you say, of how much they're going to get in net and how much can they stop. Because they're pretty good at shot suppression. The challenge with the Kings, when you look at their advanced stats, RB, is that they're really good on shot suppression, but their expected goals were lousy, and that goes to goaltending. And so I hope that Korpisalo will help it. And I wouldn't be shocked, RB, if we're sitting here, even though Copley saved the season, and he's been great for them. He's 19-4-2, but the reality is he might not start game 1 in the playoffs. It may be Korpisalo because on paper, Korpisalo is the better goaltender. And remember, RB, there's only one guy who had 85 saves in the playoff game, and that was Jonas Korpisalo. So hopefully he doesn't have to face that many shots to the Kings in the playoffs, but he is a solid add to this team.
It makes a huge difference. And I'm curious your thoughts, Dennis, on just how the West stacks up. Post-trade deadline, we saw this team make moves.
Yeah.
I don't know where to slot the Wild. They seem like a buyer. They seem like a kind of standing pat, taking on salary team. Obviously, Fiala leaving was a big hit. Then they go out and they get Klingberg, which I think is a big move for them. I'm not so sure on Edmonton, kind of where they are. I think they're always a question mark. Goaltending seems to be the biggest question mark for them.
Sure.
The Avalanche, they don't go out and make a bunch of big splashes, but what they do is they provide the depth that they need if this team can ever get as close to 100% healthy. They're as scary as ever. I'm curious how you see where you see the Kings slotting in, and who you see, let's say the top 4 teams kind of going into the playoffs here in the West.
Well, I'll throw all 7 teams other than the Avalanche in one basket. And again, can the Avalanche, they have enough runway to get totally healthy? And even with that, and I like the Lars Eller ad, but he's not Nas Kadri.
Right.
So I think when these teams look at the ads and saying, okay, if they're healthy, McCarr's healthy, if Gabe comes, they're really good. But are they this big, scary team that won relatively easy last year? They're not because of Nas Kadri. So, maybe it's JT Comfort, the 2, and L to 3, and you got to feel confident with the rest of the tools around them. Anybody else can win. So it's hard to handicap. And you're right about Edmonton. Great trade in getting Ekholm, but who's going to make her safe for them in the playoffs? We haven't talked about Seattle. Vegas could get there. It's really hard to handicap because you have 4 teams in the Pacific that could all win the division, could wind up being a wild card. So it's really hard to handicap. But again, if the Avalanche are 90% healthy, they're going to be the prohibitive favorites to go to the Cup final again. I mean, that's how much I believe in that team, and that's how much I respect the team. So the Kings, could they be in the top 4 in the Pacific or in the West? They absolutely could be. And then one thing on Minnesota, watch how they're winning games, RB. They're 7-1-2 in the last 10. All those games, 3-2, 2-1, 2-0. That's how they're winning games now, which is really playoff hockey. So it's really surprising that they traded a guy like Jordan Greenway. But I think it's a crapshoot. I think any of these teams, and again, I think that the Avalanche can find a way to win the Central and be probably a 1 or 2 seed. Who their opponents coming out of the Pacific, flip a coin. I really can't handicap it this time. That's how close these teams are because they do all have flaws.
This definitely feels like a different year than last year. Looking, at the Avalanche slate, this is a team that's very top heavy in their scoring. Mikko Rantanen has been leading this team leading the league with the share of his team's goals. Far and away the team's best player. Nathan McKinnon as well. Cale Makar, obviously, we all know what he can bring. But the depth scoring has really been up and down, and as much of a cakewalk through the playoffs as it was last year, I'm not so sure that things are going to be as easy this year if everybody doesn't start contributing. And that's something we've seen from the Kraken. People are contributing. That's something we're seeing from the Kings. People are contributing. So I think it's going to be an interesting season. Any predictions for your game today or the game against the Avalanche this week, DB?
Yeah, well, they're playing the Blues tonight, the Kings, so that they should win that game. But I think that's the one. if you look at a scheduled loss, the Avalanche is probably a scheduled loss because I watched a lot of Avalanche games. Certainly love my man Mose and Connor McGahey, but they're starting to feel it, RB. So I'll say, well, I think if the Kings get out of Denver with a point, I think they'll be happy to come home and play some more home games. So that'll be my prediction.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. That's fair. I mean, we saw the New Jersey Devils really put an offensive beatdown on the Avs the other night, but they never quit. Twice the Avalanche were within one goal of that game, a game they should have been out of in the first 10 minutes. So you can't really count them out. Dennis, thank you for joining me. It's always a pleasure. Hopefully I'll get to see you out here soon, maybe for that Western Conference Final.
You got it, RB. It's great talking to people in Denver. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
We'll talk to you again soon. That's Dennis Bernstein from the fourth period. Man gave me a road to my first start in the NHL, giving me a writing job for the fourth period. I actually meant to bring one of the magazines that I was in into the studio to show off. I didn't because I have no memory whatsoever. You fool! Probably cringeworthy writing. I have some old writings that are just awful, and I can't imagine. They took a flyer on me, took a risk, brought in a young guy. I think more of the risk was on their side. Just, I was an unknown commodity who probably couldn't write very well. I'd like to think that I'm better now, but maybe I'm not. But this has been The Hockey Show. Ryan Bolden, your host, going solo today. Thank you to all our guests. Taylor Baird from Dallas for joining us. John Forslund, Seattle's play-by-play man for the Kraken, for joining me. And Dennis Bernstein from the fourth period. It's been a good show. Thank you, Danny, for carrying us through.
You did all the hard work, Ryan.
I don't know. You were active, working the phones, playing the music, making the cuts on the video feed. I just sit here and talk and look at notes and tweets. But this has been The Hockey Show, Mile High Sports Radio. We'll see you soon.